Nya-Gabriella. Welcome to In Her Bag. I'm very excited to have you both here as we talk about strategic connection. Deja, you work over at AdWeek. Nya-Gabriella, you work over at Digital Brand Architects. I know we are all very familiar with both brands, but I want you two to run me through a little bit more about your role and your work and what it is that you do. And Deja, we'll start with you.
Well, thanks so much, Danielle, for having me and being here with Nya-Gabriella is just very special. We have a long history and we are also alums of the same university. So shout out to Hampton. But I am the director of programming at AdWeek, where I specialize in fashion, beauty, and culture programming. However, as we know, AdWeek is a trade magazine that's really dedicated to marketing and advertising. So I get down with a little of all the styles of programming that we have, but I am responsible for really curating our sessions at our events, our panel sessions that vary from keynotes to firesides, full on roundtables, you name it, I program it. And I work with folks like Nya-Gabriella to book talent and creators and just thought leaders to come and speak on those specific topics. So that's it in a nutshell. Programming can be very different at different places, but at AdWeek it's special because I have also really built it to be what I've wanted it to be and to focus in more on creators, and I'm sure we'll touch on that. But also long form partnerships. So super excited to have this conversation with you guys today.
Oh, welcome.
Thank
Okay,
you.
and Nya-Gabriella, a little bit about you and your role at DBA.
Yeah, so I co-lead the brand partnerships team at DBA, which also ladders up to our parent company, UTA. So there's a new umbrella at the company called UTA Creators, where it houses all of our digital creators and influencers. So my team, we work with people like Daisha and brands and agencies to help creators find the perfect partnership. So I make a lot of jokes like I have to feed a lot of kids because it's a roster of over 700 creators. And it's really cool. It's a really exciting position to be in because I have a bird's eye view of the influencer space and just all the different types of partnerships that come about. I think a lot of times when people think about influencer partnerships, they just think of like SponCon, but really creators are evolving to be brands themselves. So it's a really cool space to be in.
Yeah. And I love that, the two of you even work directly with each other and bring, the creators to the stage, the creators.
Mhm.
And so I'll start with you, Naya. Your experience spans working with luxury brands like Maserati and Patron to managing partnerships with over 700 creators over at DBA. So how did your early career in digital marketing influence your ability to navigate the complexities of influencer marketing?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I actually started my career at a boutique PR agency on their digital team. And in that at that time, like social media was still kind of new. Everyone was trying to figure out how to monetize it, how to figure out how to work with creators. So when we were on this team, like you were the copywriter, you were the photographer, you were negotiating brand deals with creators, you were just doing everything just because it was already a small team. So I feel like being able to have my hands in so many different like bags, if you will, helped me be able to multitask. And then also I feel like I've been able to be very nimble and just be able to, I feel like this industry is changing so much. Like yesterday, like 2 days ago, we didn't have TikTok and now we have it again, and people are trying to figure out what to do with that. So being able to like roll with the punches is a key skill that I feel like I've gotten from the early days.
Yeah. Even just how the landscape can change so quickly. It really just goes to show how like, the relationships, your network, and your communities are just so important when it comes to being able to pivot like in the world of like creators and within that economy. Now, Deja, your background is in strategic communications and fashion marketing, which is very uniquely positioned. And it's really put you in a place to be able to build like really creative partnerships. So tell me about how your expertise in these areas have influenced your approach to connecting with brands and creators.
Yeah, so let me just say strategic communications is a fancy name for PR. That was my major at Hampton. I was a PR major. They changed the name of it in the middle. Naya
I
probably
remember that. Yes.
And I was like, ooh, the ghetto, what is this? Like, I don't know what this means, but here we are. But I had a really great mentor, and he really opened my eyes to PR. When I first started at Hampton, I was a print journalism major. I thought that I was going to write the rest of my life. I've always loved magazines, and I was so laser focused on I'm just going to be an editor. And he was like, "Girl, you can do so much." Like, he knew early, he could see things obviously that I couldn't see at that time, but he was like, "You're so good with strategy," because I would help folks on campus with their campaigns when they were running for like SGA or something like that. And I could come up with it very quickly. And I didn't think nothing of it. I was just like, this is common sense. You should be doing this. But, that really just helped me to open my eyes, right? So when I graduated, I went to LIM in New York for fashion marketing. I kind of bundled all these things together. I started off at Spring Studios. That landed me into event production. I also, like Nya, was at a very small, well, factory isn't as small these days, but it was, growing PR agency. So I worked on the fashion tech side, which is interesting because I knew nothing about that either at the time. But I realized that I just had this, again, natural knack for people and talent and special moments. And I knew I didn't want to go the traditional publicist route. So at that point, I was like, okay, how do I put all of these things together? And like I said, I was in grad school and I talked to one of my professors there, and I was like, I really think that production is something that I would be interested in, but I just didn't know. I knew nothing. And I tell people this all the time. I knew nothing about event production. I always knew of planning. And folks, they're always like, what's the difference? But it is a difference. And from there, I fell into talent. I fell into influencer from another mentor that came along the way. And it's just always been people that saw things in me that I didn't see for myself at first. And my mentor was just like, influencer marketing is growing. And I remember in college doing case studies and things of that nature. And again, I just did not think that it was a route, right? Like, I just was like, okay, whatever. I want to work at a magazine, like I didn't think anything besides that. And so when I fell into influencer, I was like, okay, this is great. And that's really at one of the agencies I worked at, that's how I came into contact with Nya. And I was working on campaigns and gifting, of course, more of when you're a junior, that style of work. But just me being very eager to be in the talent space, in the creator space. I've freelanced, I talk about this often. I've freelanced throughout my entire career while I've had, full-time roles, just so I could learn more and be more active in the creator space, no matter if I was doing it at my full-time job or not. So to go back to your question about, just long-term partnerships and really forging the two, I just created my own path. I didn't know what I was doing when I first started. I was just like, I like all of these things. How do I merge them together? And that's really, how I even landed at AdWeek, because of my background being so varied, strategic, but varied. And so yeah, that's really it in a nutshell.
Your mentor at Hampton, was that Professor Butler?
Of course.
Same.
Yes, of course. We all loved him. So
Yeah, he
yeah,
told me to take my butt back to New Jersey and work in one of the biggest markets, New York, because I
yeah.
was trying to move to Florida, and he was like, "Why?" So
Really? Oh wow.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
We love
even that
Professor.
kind of just goes to show, like, Deja, you mentioned that a lot of people saw things within you that you didn't quite see yourself. So even
Um,
when we talk about like strategy just in general, is really just like a long-term plan with like a number of milestones that just lead to a specific goal. And so while you may not have had that for yourself, at least like a number of people had that for you. And then Naya, same thing, is that somebody had that same vision for you. And so I'd love like both of your perspectives in terms of like, at what point did you kind of really understand exactly what strategy is? And in terms of like both of your separate industries, what are some of the key milestones that even go into developing that long-term vision, that long-term plan?
that's a really good question. I feel like a lot of people don't understand strategy and that it takes work and it takes practice. So, I mean, again, I feel like we're leaning on this theme of mentorship. One of the agencies I worked on, I worked at Conan Wolf before it was BCW and everything, and I had a boss Julie Maddox. She was so smart, and she just kind of like threw me in the water. Was like, okay, put this plan together. And she would like rip it to shreds, in like the most productive way, obviously. But she really took the time to like sit with me and like would ask me a ton of questions, like, who's our audience? Why are we trying to speak to them? Like, why would they care about this? And we were just like drilled down until we got these like plans and strategies absolutely like correct and to the T. Like she would even tell clients like it's not ready yet. Like you're gonna have to wait another day, because she was so like laser focused on things like the dots being connected and making sense and not just throwing things against the wall. So, and even now, like I was talking to someone in my team, they're kind of like, she's like a junior strategist and she really enjoys it. And you're just talking about like her career, what that looks like. And she was like, I feel like people think I just put decks together. Like strategy is a little bit more than that. And I do feel like that's what people think. Like it's just like a deck with pretty photos and you pick out some influencers that you like. But it's really like, what is, what is the story that you're trying to tell and how are you going to connect with people? And then even like for my own personal life, like I think about that, I'm like, what is NGP's like total story and like how am I trying to get there?
Yeah. Yeah. And Deja?
Yeah, I would definitely say same. For me. Mentorship has just been so monumental in my life, and it's all been great women, right? Particularly women of color from different backgrounds. And I would say one of the agencies that I worked at was I worked directly with the VP of influencer. And I think that's something also I should call out, that I've been very lucky to work directly with the senior executive, right? Like even when I started as a event coordinator, I worked directly with the CEO. Like I reported into her. And then, we got an event director who later became this mentor that I'm talking about. But I've always just worked at a super high level, and I've had to learn how to manage those folks and manage, the little small teams I might have had, whether that was an intern or a coordinator or whatever level I was at. But I say that to say that that's very important because VPs and, directors and above are working on strategy, right? And so I was able to work hand in hand with them. Like Nya, I was able to kind of just mock up something and present it and get the feedback, whether it was nice or nasty. But it was beneficial, right? And it gave me practice. And I've always just been a person that's like, hey, can I shadow you? Can I work on something? Very early on, when I was an event coordinator, I would ask, how do you build out budgets? How do you redline contracts? And I was just a coordinator, and I would sit with the director and she would show me. And then maybe if we had a new client come in, hey, Deja, you want to take a stab at this budget? Or hey, Deja, you want to, take a stab at redlining this? And sometimes I'd be like, sure, like I don't really know, but it helps because now I really think I'm like a fierce negotiator, right? And I can come up with, I've worked on multi-million-dollar budgets and I'm comfortable working in that, right? But I probably wouldn't have been if no one would have taken me under their wing. And so when I think of strategy, yes, it's more than decks. But to be honest, I just came to the realization like, hey, you are a strategist. You've been putting together strategies, you've been putting together these creative ideas, and it's sometimes hard as a multi hyphenate to come up with that name for yourself. Like, what are you at the core? And so one of my good friends who I do my podcast with, she was like, girl, you're a brand strategist. You're all the things. Like, you come up with all the things, just call yourself that. And I was like, okay. At first, I was like, no, girl, because I do so much more than strategy. But then when you think about strategy, it's all the things, right? It's telling a story. If you work in talent and influencer, you're creating a strategy that best fits the talent, the brand. It's storytelling at its finest. And so once I became comfortable, with the title, it just kind of all fell in place.
Someone actually recently asked me that because I feel
Yeah.
like in my role, people are like, "Are you a salesperson or is this a marketing role or whatever?" And I told someone, I was like, "I'm a strategist, and you need both. Like, you need
Yes.
the dollars to be able to make your dreams come true, and I also need to be able to tell the story." So I feel like a brand strategist is definitely like the perfect title for you.
Well, thank you. See, all this, I just love it. Thank you.
Say that a strategy is like if you're going on a road trip and you 20 years ago printed out the directions on MapQuest and there's like all It's like 3 pages just to get to this one place. But essentially that is strategy. Whenever people get like a little confused as to like, what exactly is it? But even with what you just mentioned, like being able to connect these creators with these brands, be able to manage these big budgets. And when you're dealing with people who have like such huge platforms, whether it be, like the speakers who you have at AdWeek or the creators who you work with at DBA, like I'm sure you get a number of requests from whether they be, like huge companies or small creators. And we always know that, when people are in business, like they try to keep those budgets tight. So when you're dealing with these people who have incredible influence, but these people who also have money to spend, what are some of like the non-negotiables when you enter those conversations of creating a partnership?
Nya, you.
I mean, these are Naya.
Right, I know. I'm trying to think that non-negotiables get negotiated all the time. Like,
I'm like, what are those?
And maybe that's just like a difference of like, so creators and brands, like they can always have like their boundaries, like not that's fine. But in terms of like when you get down to like the business and the nitty gritty and like the things that you guys definitely get pulled in for and having those tough conversations, what would you say is maybe like the top like 1 to 3 things that maybe people try to get like a little slide on?
Well,
oh,
I was just going to say, and you'll probably touch on this in GP, but I think for me, a non-negotiable, because see, I've worked on both sides of this, right? Like I've been in the brand contracting talent, and then I've been on the agency side, working with the client. And I think a non-negotiable for me as a person is when we get down to payment. And so I've seen a lot of, you could keep this in or you could take it out. But I've seen a lot of, just unfair pricing strategy, right? And so I've always sat in the middle of what do I do best for the client, but also how do I advocate for the talent? And that's very important to me. And I've always, at any job that I've been at, I've always tried to bring along creators of underrepresented communities. And as we know, sometimes those payments are less, right? So that's a non-negotiable to me. And I'm not afraid to go back to the client and say, hey, we need to raise this a little bit because of the ROI, and just because of the clear KPIs that this creator has or this talent has. And so when I think of it, I guess from that lens, that's a non-negotiable for me. Like I said, maybe once Nya says hers, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's something too. But I think at this point in my career, like I'm just not in a place where I don't speak up for what I know is right or what I'm very strongly connected to. Just yesterday I had a conversation about, just expanding our knowledge of folks of color and disabled communities and LGBT and like us advocating for them and not always putting the folks that everyone knows, on stages or on the cover or whatever that looks like. So I'm always at odds because it's something that I'm passionate about for myself. And so I have to bring that passion to the work. And I used to, when I was junior, struggle with speaking up, as I'm sure most people are. But now I'm like, no, like someone has to be it, like someone has to say it. So yeah, that's my one. I know you said 3, but I'll probably have to come back.
We'll probably end up like paying you right back.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say mine is an extension of payment. I feel like there are times brands approach us and sometimes they have large sums of money, which is cool, but sometimes they have like no money and they act like they're doing us a favor. So I feel like my non-negotiable is like if we're gonna enter a contract with you, you need to treat my team who you're gonna be talking to day to day with respect. And then you need to have respect for the talent as well. You'd be surprised how many people are like, well, we're paying her, so she should just do it. And it's like, no, you're paying her for her input, her content creation, how she puts everything together, her audience. So I think sometimes there's this moment where people see influencers and talent as like property, and that is like a hard no for me. There's been times where we've been in conversations with brands and like they've been like really nasty to my team, really nasty to the talent. And then we call the talent like, this is what's going on, and like we can walk away and find you another deal. Like I promise you there's more money out there. So that's definitely a hard no for me.
Piggybacks off of, you know what I was saying. It's a respect factor there, right? Like we're all humans, but I hear that often from agents and managers that I speak with about that non-human factor. And it's like, no, they're not property. And I've always it like I said, I've always been in that awkward position of, yes, this is my client, but I'm not going to let them just treat the talent or creators like anything. And so I'm fighting on both sides, you know?
That's
Um,
honestly why I came to the talent side, honestly. Because you
yeah.
know, like I really enjoyed the work I did on the brand side, but like to nickel and dime creators over like and trying to save these big brands money. And I was like, this is a creator that got like like why can't we just give her the extra $500? Like what like how is that gonna hurt you?
Hmm. Hmm.
Oh no, even on the like the Forbes like creator list, you look at the money that these creators are making, and it is impressive. Like, don't get me wrong, but you also know it's a fraction of what these companies are making. And just in that, it's like, okay, like you guys don't need to be like so stingy. Like clearly there's influence here. I mean, and that was also something that just perplexed me about the TikTok ban is that the amount of money that has, come out of the creator industry and the creator economy is just like it's in the billions, like if not tens of, and if not hundreds of billions. Like there's incredible talent here. So yeah, no, absolutely. The fact that the process needs to be respected and the talent needs to be respected. Okay, so Naya, in managing a roster of creators like Jackie Aina and Alex Cooper, how do you ensure alignment between creators and brands to create meaningful partnerships?
Well, those two young ladies that you mentioned, they're not afraid to say how they feel.
We love that for them.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the creators I work with are at that level of success, are not afraid to say, not afraid to stand on business about what they will and will not do. And the team around them, including myself, we know what those are. So a lot of times things will come across our desk and we're like, this is probably not a fit just based on past conversations. However, we still have to bring it to the talent and just like do our due diligence. So I would say it's always a conversation and we advise about whether we think it's a good deal or whether it's not. But yeah, I would say like all of our like top talent are like formidable forces and they know exactly what they will or will not do and they have a vision for themselves and then we're just here to like support and like, help them do their thing.
Yeah, like we're just here. Just
Yeah.
know what we're doing.
Yeah.
But in terms of some of like, the newer creators and the ones who are maybe like micro or nano and they're just starting to come into this space, what's typically something that you might give them as like words of encouragement or some advice in terms of approaching these partnerships?
Yeah, so we've been in the space for a really long time, which I feel like is such a luxury being a TBA/UTA. And then my department specifically, like I said, we help brands and agencies connect creators with so many different opportunities. So I have a bird's eye view of like what's going on. So we're able to advise them, like, hey, like if you I'm like if you want to work with Walmart, like you should probably stay away from Amazon. You know what I mean? Like if that's not going to work, or like if you want to be in the luxury space, like doing this Amazon deal might not be best for you. It's about brand alignment. So we have historical data, I would say. We're able to see how brands have worked with other creators, what they're looking for to advise new creators and help them grow in the direction that they want to go.
Yeah, and that alignment and leveraging
Yes.
that type of that comparison that consumers will end up making. I think that's something that does get missed. And so, Deja, like with your experience at AdWeek, what would you say are some of the most critical elements in fostering partnerships that drive mutual growth for stakeholders?
Well, for me, so like I said earlier, I'm mostly at the bare basis of it, right? I'm booking talent, right? But because I'm a person that comes from a special projects, partnerships, all the things kind of background, and NGP can tell you this, any conversation that I have, and even Danielle, I think we talked about this when we first chatted. I always say it's more than getting you on the stage. where it's more than just getting the talent on the stage. I want to look at this from a holistic approach. And for me, that is long form partnership. So that means, how do we get you crossed over to the editorial side? You know, I can easily get you on the stage, right? But how do we connect the dots to maybe get you on one of our podcasts or a write up or something of that nature? And that's just because the background I have. I can't say that everyone in programming, might have the same approach. But for me, it's just important. Relationships are important. I think obviously we might touch on that. But relationships in this world, in the talent space, marketing, creative in general, it's all about the connection and trying to build upon that connection. And so when I'm booking any speaker, and especially if when I get them on stage, I'm like, whoa, like they blew all of our socks off. I'm like, I got to figure out how to get them on this stage, on the podcast. We need a write up, like my wheels are then turning. But that's really it for me. And like I said earlier too, programming looks different at a GQ than it does at an AdWeek. And so, it's very basic at AdWeek, to be honest, because we work solely in the event space. But because I'm so passionate about long form partnership, I've just gone beyond that. And for example, I have friends at brands, right? And so I'm like, hey, I can get you on the stage, but I think, how do we get you guys in the room as a partner? So then you guys can tell your story to the fullest capacity and in a paid way, beyond earned media. And then we can figure out, how can we, bring other things to life together. So I'm often in the client services ear, and I know they're probably like, what now, Daisha? And I'm talking to our sales team. And these are, like I said, these are just cross departments. Like, I don't have anything to do with them, but if I have an idea, I am not afraid to go and pitch it. And I think a lot of that comes from when I worked at High Snob, because that was such a special role that was really, I had to work across the lines, that I just kind of took that with me in everything that I do now. And I'm not afraid to blur the lines. So.
Yeah.
I will say, if I can add, like, anytime I talk to you, you're 3 steps ahead. You like have this idea, and I need your take on this, but it could also be A, B, C, D, and E.
Right.
I love that. I appreciate like a full circle vision.
Yes. Yeah. That's the strategy in me, I guess.
Yeah.
There you go. See, you stepped into your power.
That's so funny. But no, that it's that for me, because I just think that, like, why do one thing together when we could do so many? So,
Yeah.
Yes. And even just building on that, there's a theme that's, come up between the two of you, as well as in my other chat that I just had with Risa Lake, which is one of our other episodes. Please go listen after this. But just the fact of getting away from the transactional. Like, I think that this has just been a rule of business, but I think that often when small business owners and entrepreneurs are just starting to enter into these conversations, they really fixate on, like, I need this, I need this, I need this. Like, you help me and I pay you, or like, I do this for you and you do this for me. But I think something that's really great that the two of you have just touched on is really getting away from that, like, one-time transaction, really trying to build out something that's significantly more robust. But now, how would you recommend, like a new brand or a small creator to get away from, maybe the jargon or the verbiage or the mindset of that one-time transaction, and really build out a strategy in terms of building that relationship?
I would say usually for newer creators that just don't know where to start and they want to start doing brand partnerships, I'm like, just start with something. Like, start within your network. Like, is there a small business? Is there a coffee shop that you enjoy like doing content for? Because I'm like, it may be paid, it may not be paid, or whatever. But I'm like, being able to show a brand that you can create content for a brand and step outside of yourself is so important. But also networking, peer to peer level. Like, how are you working with other creators, a photographer, or someone that has a different style, and you guys are helping each other? I think when we think about like network and connections and transaction, it's always like 3 to 4 steps above, which, like, obviously you want to dream big, but it's also like it's your peers. I think people forget that you guys grow together, and then next thing you know, like this person's in the C-suite and that person's an executive there, and then you have a network. Like, and I'll be honest, like now when I like blink my eyes, I'm like, oh shit, my friends are popping. Like I got, like I can call people now, and it's just, and but I've never thought of them as like I'm gonna cash in this favor. I just always thought like, oh, like Daisha's really good at this, or my friend Ashley's really good at that, and Josie's really smart. So like always like encouraging each other to do what's best, and then helping each other when we can. I think it's been really important. But just like leaning in your community is so, so important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would definitely double that and say, like, yeah, it's that. I mean, obviously, we went to a HBCU where so much great talent came out of there from both of our classes. So we have that network. Then I went to grad school twice, child. So I have So I have that network too, but it really is just that. And people are always like, so many people. And I tell them all the time, I'm like, I was friends with these folks and they just so happened to explode, and we kind of came up together. And so I don't look at them like, oh yeah, Asia's the editor at the Cut. No, that's my little sister from Hampton, And so like I've just seen her explode, and shout out to Asia Ware at the Cut, love her down. But she's a good example, right? Like I've gone to school or just met all of these folks just from, oh, we were out or we had mutual friends and now we're friends. And so that's a part of my network. So peer to peer is important. And I'd never forget, I heard Issa Rae say that on, I can't remember what it was, but she was doing a talk of her own, and she was saying everyone always looks to network up when you should be looking to network across. And that really just stuck with me. And I work with brands on the consultancy level, and I tell them sometimes it's not about how much the payment is, it's really about the connection and how you all can grow together. And maybe it is small, like to Naya's point, maybe it's small and it's, commission or, like something that you get from the content or whatever it is, but then it grows into something more because you all have that foundation. It's a relationship now, and it goes just beyond the transaction, and they know they can call you if they need something specific, or or even if they don't. But it's really just about networking. I say that all the time. It's about networking and making genuine connections. And there's going to be folks that you just really mesh with, like Danielle. You're one of my newer girls that I just love, right? And we meshed from the beginning, and it's never felt transactional for me. And so I tell people all the time, find folks that you gel with, find girls or guys that you have something in common with, and that helps to make it more natural. Of course, there's going to be people that you want to be connected to that you guys might be on the total opposite end of the spectrum, but we're all humans, right? Find something that might connect you together, and then that helps to build the connection in the relationship.
Yeah. Birds of a feather truly do flock together. So,
Yeah.
I mean, being in places where, you can find like-minded individuals, and if you, gel with those people, also like ask them to, introduce you to people in their
Yes.
network who you think could be a fit. But even something about like on the topic of transactional relationships and getting away from them. There's this wonderful saying that currency comes in many forms. And so, Deja, something that you mentioned is that, sometimes the compensation might not be exactly what you want. How can small businesses, brands, and creators approach relationships where maybe like the monetary value isn't there, but there could be something else that is of greater value? So how can they, facilitate that conversation and find a more common ground in a way that they can still grow?
Honestly, for me on my end, I have a lot of friends that are creatives, right? So I like to give examples, y'all. So for example, I have a friend who's a bomb copywriter. She's probably done copy that you all have seen and didn't know it was her. She sometimes struggles with having those conversations. So she's like, Deja, can I CC you and you help me facilitate this? Sure. And I think sometimes it's just leaning on your network, or well, so her and I, we're friends, right? So we have goals. And I'm like, this year, you're not going to be afraid to tell these folks you want that 10K, or whatever the price is. And so we work together on her responses. And now I really have her emailing folks back so they can know it's her and it's in her tone. And so she gets comfortable with it. But back to your question, I think it's that it's either leaning on someone that you're comfortable with or the practice of it, right? Like you just cannot be scared. And even for myself, I'm telling myself this too, as a growing entrepreneur, you can't be scared, to advocate for yourself, to go get the money, to have these conversations, to really hone in on what you're worth, because that's really what it is. And yeah, I hope that answered it though.
Oh, beautifully. Great, great, great. And now
Um,
out there?
Yeah, I was just gonna say when you're thinking about like brand and talent relationships, I think sometimes people, because there's no compensation, are easy to say no. Or on the other side, brands don't want to approach talent because they don't have compensation. And I know that's like such a touchy subject. But I think like to Dacia's point, like think about what you have and what you can offer. Like sometimes there are brands that come to me and they're like, oh my God, I really want to work with Jackie, or I really want to work with this person, but we don't have the budget. And I'm like, well, what do you have? Like what can you offer? Because like for some of the alcohol brands, like they have key accounts. So they have access to all of these bars and cool spaces. And I'm like, okay, like maybe someone wants to throw their birthday at this place or someone wants to launch an event. Like just thinking creatively about like how you can give to someone and just thinking outside the box. Yeah.
Even that's like a perspective I've never even considered is that, yeah, so like you might not, be able to offer something, but someone in your network who might be able to, support you in that can definitely help in facilitating that relationship. So lean on your people.
I had a friend meet, she was setting up a panel and she couldn't like pay people to come on, which was fine. And one girl was coming from out of town and she was like, I just need a hotel room. And she was able to call someone in her network, the manager of some hotel, and get her a room for 2 nights, and everyone was happy. So it's just like, yeah, you just gotta like use your network and get creative.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised, like what people are willing to offer and to do. It's like it really goes back to closed mouths don't get fed. If you
Mhm.
don't speak on it, if you don't ask, if you don't inquire, how would you know, right? Like I literally just went through this yesterday with another client. I'm like, listen, just go back to them and say, we need to get closer to this, and what other things can we, add on, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it's not like I said earlier, it's about not being afraid. And not being afraid to ask questions too, because I think a lot of folks get tied up in and get caught up in not wanting to, especially when they're working with a brand. I don't want to piss them off, or I don't want them to not work with me because I ask too many questions. Ask all the questions. Like you do a disservice to yourself if you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
was just telling someone on my team that was on the call with her, and she was being kind of timid with the brand
Mhm.
about budget. And I was like, you're doing them a favor. I was like,
Right.
ask her what the budget is so you can help put the programming together. Because I was like, you don't have to be shy about it. But same thing. She was like, well, I don't want to piss them off. And I was like, you're not. I was like, we're helping them. We're doing their job.
And if you do end up pissing them off, like, is that someone you want to work with anyways?
Right.
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 And to be honest, I've worked with Nike a lot, right? And if anyone has ever worked with them, they can be tough.
Mhm.
But they value people that are transparent and will come to them directly. And I've always been someone that say, "Hey, this isn't going to work. I need some more money to bring this to life, or if there isn't more money, this is what can be done within this bucket." And that's where that transparency communicative piece comes in. People have to be okay with communicating what can happen and what can't, and not really selling dreams. I'm not a dream seller, right? Like we're here to do a job and I'm trying to do it well. We got to work together. It's a marriage. So
I
yeah.
feel like transparency has taken me a long way in this business and
Yes.
just being,
Yes.
I always tell everyone, I'm like, I'm a straight shooter. I'm like, if you give me a budget, I'll tell you if you can afford said scope of work or not. And I was like, and then I'll give you an alternative if you can't afford it. But like me overselling and under delivering does no one any good.
I think that the key thing that you're both touching on is that in a, strategic connection, at the end of the day, it's really just a relationship. a very clear it's like dating with marriage in mind. It's you have
Yes.
very clear end goal of what you want here. It has to be mutually beneficial, but it can also be flexible. So you just need to figure out like what your non-negotiables are, what you're trying to get from that relationship, and that there's nothing wrong with wanting to get something from a relationship. They're supposed to be intentional. Um, and then figure out how you move forward from there. Okay, but I have a last two questions for you. So, for both of you, what advice would you give to small businesses or emerging creators looking to leverage partnerships to scale their reach without compromising their brand identity?
That's a good one.
Do your research.
Yes.
I feel like there are a lot of people on both sides. So a brand will come to me and they just want to work with some talent because they're so buzzy or they see them all over the internet, whatever. Or vice versa, there's a talent that sees a brand that's working with all the creators and why aren't they working with them? But then when you look at them and you take a closer look, you're like, it's actually not a brand fit. Like there actually doesn't make sense for either one of you. And I feel like some of my most successful brand partnerships, the brand came to me wanting someone in mind, but kind of wanting them in mind because they knew why they were a brand fit. They were like, they speak to our audience. They understand, like, I like the way she talks to our audience, is very approachable. That's how we talk to our consumers. And even like I had one partnership where like the talent wasn't sure if they were a brand fit, but like when they shared their data points and their research about why they thought she was a fit, it was like, okay, this makes sense. So I think go beyond face value, and I feel like that can go into so many things in life and just like but go beyond the face value, do the extra work, do the research, make sure the values actually align. It's the content that you want to do, because even like sometimes aesthetically, like you want to work with a brand, but when you create the content it looks weird sharing on each other's pages, so you can't even cross collaborate and cross share to get the extra reach. I think research is so important.
Yeah. That that is number one. I mean, there's wow. When you work in the agency world, you can have all the stories for days, but that a story came to my mind and I was like, yes, they didn't do the research. But I would say from a business perspective, like that's where you should hone in on the strategy, right? It's like, what if I am wanting to work with creators? What does that strategy look like? What does the partnership look like? And it goes back to us talking about long form partnership. What am I doing beyond just maybe this campaign or, whatever the initiative is? It's really going beyond that. And I loved how Naya said, basically, know your why, right? Like, this story. So I'm gonna just tell the story because it's very relevant.
Examples if she has
But
stories.
examples, because I think people need clear examples, because it's unfortunate that, I've had brands where you're trying to extend their reach, right? Like they're used to a specific creator and I'm trying to extend like, hey, you should also look at this. But, then sometimes when you extend the reach, they are just so stuck on what they're used to. And so I had a client at one of my agencies that was like, "Oh, she's not smiling in the pictures." Well, she doesn't smile, and you knew that when you contracted her. So then it goes back to doing your research, honing in, on the strategy, and also listening to the experts. Naya and I are essentially specialists and experts in the field. And if you hire these folks for their expertise and their knowledge, really, lean to them as that, right? And like, don't fight everything. Like, we can have these conversations, but it goes much deeper, and we would probably need another hour. But I
I
just
was just thinking, you said the smiling thing and then brought up like three other
that,
stories you
that's
had.
what I'm
I was
saying.
like, yeah.
I told you. Yeah. So it's like, but that's a clear example of, you wanted to extend your reach. Kudos to you for that. But then you didn't really, if we're presenting you with a list and we're saying these people are great, you then as the brand partner should also look into the folks and see their posting style, because I don't want you to come back to me and say, "Oh, they're not smiling." That's just like, I'm not taking that back to the creator,
Yeah.
because you knew that when you contracted them, right?
Yeah.
Like, or you should have known. And if you didn't do your due diligence.
Yeah.
And that's your fault.
Her
So
smiling is not hers.
no, it's not her, because that's who she is. That's the type of content that she produces and creates. She does, if you want it bubbly, contract bubbly. That's, obviously.
Danielle, you'd be surprised how many times we get that feedback. I probably have 3 emails in my inbox right now. It's something in that same
It
vein.
sounds small, but it's a big thing, because it just really goes back to not knowing the creator, and just contracting people because, oh yeah, they did say that this was a good person, but fight me on it if you don't think it is, because if you want them to smile and you see that she doesn't, then I'll say whatever I'll say, and we can, fix it accordingly. But I think it's just annoying, if it's after the fact,
Yeah.
So
definitely do your due diligence.
please.
Yes.
Please.
Lastly, again, for both of you, if you could give one piece of advice to entrepreneurs or creators about building impactful partnerships, what would it be?
I feel like we've said so many good things, so I don't want to repeat myself, but I'm just going to lean on this theme that we've been talking about, of like using your network.
Yeah.
I also would say, like, we started to talk about this, but we didn't really dive in, but also using your network as a reflection, because I feel like between me and Daisha in this conversation, there's been so many people in our lives that have been like, hey, you're really good at this. So like leaning on your network, and when they're telling you that you're good at something and maybe you should focus on something or pivot, listen to that and like hone in on that advice. And like it might put you in a new direction, but it'll probably be more fruitful. But again, like leaning into your community is so important. Doing your research is so important, and not doing what's trendy just because it's trendy. If it's trendy and it aligns with your brand and it aligns with like what's going on in your life, great. But doing something and it's like a force fit, like there's so many times I see creators, I'm like, why'd you do that? Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, you didn't want to do that TikTok. Like you didn't want to dance. Like, you know what I mean? And it's just like being honest with yourself and what actually makes sense for you.
Yeah. So network, authenticity, and do your due diligence.
Yes.
Okay. Daisha?
It's those things that you mentioned.
We're good.
I think it, also for me, we talked about this too, like leaning in on your network, and mentorship obviously has been just great for me and Naya and just a lot of folks that I know, and really just leaning onto them and making those authentic connections. And not being afraid. I say this, and I will say this till I'm like blue in the face, like don't be afraid to speak up and to ask questions, whether it is to your mentor or whoever. You're not bothering them. You're doing yourself a disservice to not ask. And don't be afraid to extend your knowledge. Like I said, I have 2 master's degrees, but one of them is in fashion law, right? Because I wanted to extend the knowledge on just things that I cared about, which was negotiation and budgeting and human rights, and how can I merge the two, and what are the legalities that I should know when I'm working with talent or brands, and how to easily call them out with the correct verbiage. So just don't be afraid to go beyond what you know. And I tell people that all the time. Yeah.
Don't be afraid to go beyond what you know.
Ooh,
Love that. Love that. Okay, well, thank you both so much for joining us.
thank you for having us.